Emma and Charles had built a life together over the course of 35 years. Their marriage, once filled with excitement and dreams, had settled into a comfortable, predictable rhythm. To the world, they were the epitome of a perfect couple. Emma
was the devoted wife who spent her days caring for their home, ensuring their children were well raised, and supporting Charles in every way possible. Charles, on the other hand, was the reliable husband, always busy with work, but never failing
to show affection and appreciation. Their neighbors admired them, often commenting on how lucky they were to have such a loving and stable family. Their house was a beautiful two-story home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, with flower beds lining the driveway and a backyard where their children once played. The walls of the house were adorned with pictures of family vacations, birthday celebrations, and the countless memories they had created over the years. From the outside, everything seemed flawless. Their life, at least to the casual observer, was the definition of success. Yet, beneath the surface, Emma began to notice the subtle changes in her husband's behavior. It wasn't anything overt, nothing that would immediately raise suspicion, but little things began to shift. Charles, who had once been her constant companion, started spending more time alone in his study long after Emma had finished preparing dinner. The evening conversations, which had always been filled with laughter and shared stories, became short and strained. When Emma asked about his day, Charles often gave vague responses, his mind clearly preoccupied elsewhere. Emma tried not to let these small shifts bother her. After all, she reasoned, their lives had become routine. She had grown accustomed to the quiet evenings and the lack of excitement. Maybe it was simply a phase, she told herself. Maybe Charles was just focused on his work or dealing with stress that he didn't want to burden her with. She had been married to him long enough to know that men often retreated into themselves when something was on their mind. So she allowed herself to believe that it was nothing more than that. One evening, as Emma was tidying up the living room, she noticed Charles's phone on the kitchen counter. It was an odd place for it to be, considering he was usually meticulous about where he left his things. Curiosity got the better of her, and she glanced at the screen. A text message popped up from an unfamiliar name, Julia. It wasn't the name that startled Emma, but the time the message had been sent. Late at night, long after Emma had gone to bed. At first, she tried to dismiss it. Maybe it was a work contact, someone Charles was helping with a project. But the more she thought about it, the more uneasy she felt. The message was short, just a simple, "Good night, love." Emma's heart skipped a beat. Was this just a colleague, or was there something more? She hadn't seen Charles interact with anyone named Julia before, and the term of endearment unsettled her. Still, she didn't want to jump to conclusions. After all, it was possible that Emma was simply overreacting, but deep down, she knew something was different. Something was changing, and it felt like the beginning of a story she wasn't prepared to hear. Every time she saw Charles looking at his phone with a secretive glance, or when he excused himself to make a call in private, her suspicions grew. She found herself wondering whether her perfect life had been nothing more than an illusion. Story written without her knowledge or consent. And as the days went by, she began to wonder if Charles was still the man she had married, or if the man she thought she knew had become someone else entirely. As the weeks passed, Emma's suspicions about Charles began to fester. At first, they were little things. His increasingly distant demeanor, the late nights he spent in his study, the sudden avoidance of her touch or gaze, but each tiny detail added weight to the growing feeling that something was wrong. She told herself it was just her imagination, a fleeting anxiety that would soon pass. But deep down, she couldn't shake the sense that the foundation of their life together was starting to crack. One evening, Emma returned home from running errands to find Charles still at work, hunched over his desk, typing away on his computer. The soft glow of the screen illuminated his face, but there was something about the way he didn't even look up when she entered the room that unsettled her. Normally, he would have greeted her with a smile, asking about her day, or at least made some attempt to engage in conversation. But tonight, he barely acknowledged her presence. She walked into the kitchen, silently putting away the groceries. The silence in the house was heavy, suffocating even. She felt like she was walking on eggshells, afraid to disturb the fragile peace they were both pretending to maintain. Emma had always been the type to seek comfort in routine, but now, even the simplest tasks, like unpacking groceries or folding laundry, felt like burdens. She kept finding herself glancing at the clock, wondering when Charles would finally finish with his work and come to bed. That night, as they lay in bed together, Emma felt the space between them grow. Charles turned his back to her as he always did when he was deep in thought, but tonight, the distance felt wider. His body language was closed off, tense. Emma lay there, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She remembered the text message from Julia, and the name echoed in her mind like a constant drumbeat. Who was this woman? What was her relationship with Charles? The questions gnawed at her, eating away at the calm she had so desperately tried to hold on to. The next morning, Emma made a decision. She would look into it. She knew it was a violation of trust, but the gnawing suspicion had grown too strong to ignore. She had to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. She wasn't sure what she was expecting to find, but when she saw Charles's phone on the kitchen counter again later that week, the temptation was too strong to resist. This time, her hands trembled slightly as she picked it up. Charles had left the phone unlocked, a small oversight she had never noticed before. She opened the Messages app and scrolled through the conversation between Charles and Julia. Her heart sank as she read the words. It wasn't just friendly chatter, nor was it strictly business. The messages between the two were filled with affection, intimate exchanges that only confirmed what Emma had feared. There was something more between Charles and Julia. Emma's eyes froze on a message from Julia that read, "Can't wait to see you tonight. I miss you so much." The words sent a chill through her. For years, Emma had been the one Charles leaned on, the one he confided in, the one who shared in his victories and struggles. And now, here was another woman, claiming a piece of him that Emma had always thought was hers. It was like a punch to the gut, and she felt herself spiraling into disbelief and anger. At that moment, Emma knew she couldn't pretend anymore. The perfect life she had once known was a lie, built on secrets she never suspected. Her world had tilted on its axis, and the foundation she had spent decades building was crumbling before her eyes. As she sat in the kitchen, staring at the eBay screen, the weight of the discovery settled heavily in her chest. She didn't know what to do with the information. Should she confront Charles now? Should she wait for more proof? The questions felt endless. And yet one thing was clear. The truth was no longer something she could avoid. The days following Emma's discovery were a blur. She walked around in a haze, her mind consumed by the shocking truth she had uncovered. Charles had been living a double life, and now the weight of that betrayal pressed heavily on her chest. Every glance at him, every word he spoke, felt like an echo of the man she thought she knew. She could no longer see him the same way. The foundation of their marriage was shattered, and she was left picking up the pieces of a life that suddenly seemed foreign. For the next few days, Emma tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. She made breakfast, took care of the house, and did everything as if nothing had changed. But inside, she was falling apart. Her every action felt mechanical, as though she were simply going through the motions of a life that no longer belonged to her. Charles, oblivious to the storm brewing inside her, went about his usual routine, his behavior unchanged. It was almost as if he didn't realize that Emma knew the truth. Emma had always prided herself on being a perceptive person, someone who could read people and situations with a keen eye. But in the case of her own marriage, she had been blind. How could she have missed the signs? How had she been so naive to think that the life they shared was as perfect as it seemed? The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. The anger wasn't just directed at Charles, though. It was also directed at herself. How could she have let this happen? How had she allowed herself to be deceived for so long? As the days wore on, Emma found herself growing more and more distant from Charles. Their conversations, once filled with warmth and understanding, had become strained and awkward. He no longer seemed to notice the coldness between them, or perhaps he was pretending not to. He was still wrapped up in his work, still spending late hours in his study, but now Emma could see through the facade. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the sudden absences, everything fit together now, like pieces of a puzzle she had been too blind to solve until it was too late. One evening, after Charles had once again retreated into his study, Emma couldn't take it any longer. She had to confront him. She needed answers. She needed to hear the truth from him, even if it broke her in the process. She walked down the hall to his study, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the soft clatter of his keyboard as he typed, unaware of her presence. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door and stepped inside. Charles looked up in surprise. "Emma, what's wrong?" he asked, his voice sounding strained. But Emma couldn't hold it in anymore. The floodgates opened, and the words came tumbling out before she could stop them. She told him everything, the texts, the messages, the letters she had found. She told him how she had seen the signs and how, despite her doubts, she had ignored them. But now, everything was clear. The betrayal was undeniable, and she couldn't pretend anymore. Charles sat there, stunned. For a moment, there was silence. Just the weight of Emma's words hanging in the air. Then, slowly, he stood up. "Emma, I can explain," he began, but she cut him off. "You don't need to explain, Charles. The truth is right here," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "You've been having an affair with Julia. For how long? How many years? Have I been living a lie?" Charles's face fell. For the first time in years, Emma saw something she hadn't expected. Guilt. His eyes shifted uncomfortably, and his shoulders slumped as if the weight of his secret was finally catching up with him. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said quietly, his voice full of remorse. I didn't know how to end it, Emma. I was lost." Emma stared at him, the pain in her chest intensifying with each word he spoke. It wasn't just the affair that hurt, it was the betrayal of everything they had built together. She had trusted him with her heart, her life, and he had taken it all for granted. The man who had promised to love her, to cherish her, had broken her trust in the worst way possible. And now, standing before him, she realized that no apology, no excuse, could ever undo the damage. The truth had been laid bare, and Emma had to face it, no matter how much it hurt. The confrontation with Charles had left Emma feeling numb. The rawness of the moment lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating. She had demanded the truth, and now she had it, but it didn't bring her any sense of relief. Instead, it felt like a crushing weight, as though the very air around her had turned thick and unbreathable. She had spent so many years believing in the man she had married, trusting him with her heart, and now all of it had been shattered. The love they had once shared seemed like a distant memory, an illusion she could no longer hold on to. Charles had tried to explain, tried to beg for forgiveness, but Emma couldn't bear to hear it. His words felt hollow, empty, as though they were just a rehearsed script he had been repeating in his mind for years. He said he was sorry, that he never meant to hurt her, that he had been confused and lost in his own desires. But to Emma, those words sounded like nothing more than excuses, feeble attempts to cover up the years of deceit. She stood there, staring at him, her mind racing. The image of him with Julia, the secret texts, the lies, they were all too much to process. How could he have been so careless, so selfish, to let all of this unfold right under her nose? She had given him everything, and he had taken it all for granted. The betrayal ran deep, cutting into her with a sharpness she hadn't anticipated. For a moment, she almost wished that she hadn't discovered the truth. If she had remained blissfully unaware, maybe she could have continued living the life she thought she had. But now, everything had changed. She could no longer pretend that their marriage was intact, that Charles was the man she had loved for so long. The trust between them had been irreparably broken, and no amount of apology or regret could fix it. Charles reached out to her, his voice shaking as he spoke. "Emma, please. I know I've messed up. I know I've hurt you. But we've been through so much together. Don't let this destroy us. I'll do anything to make it right." Emma recoiled, stepping back as though his touch burned her. She had spent years trusting him, and now the very thought of him felt like a betrayal in itself. She couldn't look at him without seeing the man who had deceived her, the man who had lied to her face while secretly loving another woman. The anger that had been simmering inside her began to bubble up, but it wasn't just anger anymore. It was a deep, aching sadness for the life she had lost, for the future that had been stolen from her. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Charles," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. The person I thought you were is gone." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood there, his eyes filled with regret. But Emma couldn't bring herself to care. She had spent so many years putting Charles's needs before her own, building their life together, only for him to tear it all down in an instant. The pain of it was too much to bear. In the days that followed, Emma tried to process everything that had happened. She couldn't escape the image of Charles and Julia together, the thought of the betrayal gnawing at her constantly. Charles's attempts to make amends were persistent, but they felt meaningless. He would leave flowers on the kitchen counter, write notes of apology, or try to engage in conversations about their past. But Emma couldn't bring herself to engage. Each gesture felt like a futile attempt to erase the damage he had caused. The Foyer house, once filled with warmth and familiarity, now felt cold and empty. Every room seemed to echo with the memories of a life that no longer existed. Emma tried to go about her days as usual, but everything had changed. The subtle tension between her and Charles was impossible to ignore. Even the most mundane tasks, like sharing a meal or watching television together, felt strained, as if they were merely going through the motions of a life they both knew was slipping away. Emma knew she couldn't stay in this limbo forever. The decision weighed heavily on her. She had to figure out what to do next, whether to leave Charles, to try and rebuild their broken marriage, or to accept that their time together had run its course. But the thought of staying, of continuing to live in a house built on lies, felt unbearable. The trust, the love, the security she had once felt, none of it seemed real anymore. And as much as it hurt to admit, she knew deep down that she would never be able to look at Charles the same way again. Emma's decision to leave Charles was not one she made lightly. She had spent days, even weeks, wrestling with the idea, trying to find some path forward that wouldn't feel like a complete destruction of everything she had known. But every time she thought about staying, about pretending everything was fine for the sake of some illusion of peace, the pain of his betrayal gripped her too tightly. The trust that had once been the foundation of their relationship was now an unbridgeable chasm. The weight of his lies had changed her forever, and she knew that staying in this broken marriage would only continue to chip away at the person she used to be. On the evening she finally made up her mind, Emma sat down, in the living room, her hands trembling slightly as she glanced around the house. It felt so strange to think that this had once been her sanctuary, the place where she had felt safe and loved. Now, it was just a house filled with memories of a life that felt like a distant dream. She glanced at the clock, knowing that Charles would be home soon. He had been working late again, like he always did, but this time, Emma didn't feel the same sense of comfort at his return. She wasn't waiting for him with the same anticipation, the same sense of longing. Instead, she felt a cold resignation. When Charles walked through the door, he smiled as if he hadn't noticed the shift in the atmosphere. He always seemed to smile as though nothing was wrong, as though he could still pretend everything was the same. But Emma saw through it. His smile didn't reach his eyes anymore, and that told her all she needed to know. "Emma, how was your day?" he asked, placing his bag on the counter and taking off his shoes. Emma took a deep breath, standing up from the couch. "We need to talk." Charles's smile faded, and for the first time in weeks, he seemed to notice the weight in her tone. "What's going on?" Her heart raced as she looked at him, but she knew this conversation was long overdue. She had to be strong, even if it meant breaking her own heart in the process. She had already felt like a stranger in her own life. She couldn't continue to live a lie. "I'm leaving, Charles," she said, the words feeling foreign as they left her lips. But there was no turning back now. She had finally found the strength to say what had been building inside her for so long. Charles's face froze, his eyes widening in disbelief. "What do you mean you're leaving?" "Emma, we can fix this. We can work things out. I'm so sorry." "For what happened?" Emma shook her head. "It's not just about an apology anymore, Charles. It's about everything you've done. The lies, the betrayal, the years of secrets that I didn't see. You've broken me. You've broken us. And I don't think I can ever put the pieces back together." His face crumpled with emotion. He stepped toward her, his voice pleading. "Please don't do this. We've been through so much together. You can't just walk away from all of that." "I wish I could forget," Emma replied quietly, her voice filled with sorrow. "But I can't." I don't even know who you are anymore. You're not the man I married.